What happens when a beloved Hollywood star sits down for what should be a simple interview but instead faces a barrage of personal attacks and disrespectful comments from a talk show host who clearly came prepared for battle? In just 36 seconds, Stephen Colbert would destroy his own reputation with a single outrageous comment that would leave Mark Wahlberg with no choice but to walk away from the most hostile interview of his career. Before we dive into this incredible moment, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about what went down that night. This is a story that will shock you. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was supposed to be just another stop on Mark Wahlberg's press tour. The actor had been making his rounds promoting his latest film, and everything had been going smoothly. Interview after interview, Wahlberg had been his usual charming self, talking about his work, his family, and his journey from troubled youth to Hollywood success story. But something was different the moment Wahlberg walked onto Colbert's set. The atmosphere felt cold, almost hostile. The studio audience gave their usual warm applause, but Colbert's greeting was noticeably lukewarm. As Wahlberg settled into the guest chair, he could sense something was off. "So Mark," Colbert began with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for being here tonight." "Thanks for having me, Stephen," Wahlberg replied, trying to keep things light and friendly despite the strange energy in the room. Colbert shuffled his note cards dramatically, a theatrical gesture that seemed designed to create tension. "You know, I have to say, when my producers told me you were coming on, I had some mixed feelings about it." The comment caught Wahlberg off guard. This wasn't how these interviews typically started. Usually, hosts would begin with friendly banter about current projects or perhaps a funny anecdote, but Colbert seemed to be going somewhere else entirely. "Mixed feelings?" Wahlberg asked, his eyebrows raised slightly. "What do you mean by that?" Colbert leaned back in his chair, adopting a casual pose that somehow felt more threatening than relaxed. "Well, you know, your past is pretty interesting, isn't it? All those incidents when you were younger?" The studio fell quiet. This was clearly not the direction anyone expected the interview to take. Wahlberg had been open about his troubled youth in previous interviews, discussing his mistakes and how he had worked to turn his life around. It was a redemption story that had inspired many people, but Colbert seemed to be approaching it from a different angle. "I've been very open about my past, Stephen," Wahlberg said carefully. "I made mistakes when I was young. I've taken responsibility for them, and I've worked hard to become a better person." "Have you, though?" Colbert shot back quickly, his tone becoming more aggressive. "I mean, really? Because from where I sit, it looks like you just got famous and rich, and everyone decided to forget about what you did." The audience was starting to feel uncomfortable. You could hear the tension in the room. This wasn't the playful back and forth that viewers expected from a late-night talk show. This felt more like an interrogation. Wahlberg took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. "I think if you look at my life over the past 25 years, you'll see that I've dedicated myself to my family, my community, and trying to make a positive impact. I can't change what I did when I was 16, but I can control what I do now." Right, Colbert said, nodding in a way that seemed mocking. "The reformed bad boy narrative. It's very marketable, isn't it? Very Hollywood." "Marketable?" Wahlberg's voice was starting to show signs of irritation. "Stephen, I don't know what your angle is here, but I came on your show to talk about my movie, not to be attacked about things I did when I was a teenager." Colbert smiled again, but it was a cold smile. "Oh, I'm sorry. Are you uncomfortable? Because I imagine your victims were pretty uncomfortable too." The word victims hung in the air like a bomb had gone off. The studio audience was dead silent now. Even the crew members behind the cameras seemed stunned by the host's aggressive approach. Wahlberg's jaw tightened. "I've apologized for my actions. I've met with people I hurt. I've tried to make amends. What more do you want from me?" "I want honesty," Colbert said, leaning forward in his chair. "I want you to admit that your entire career is built on people forgetting about who you really are underneath all the movie star charm." "Who I really am," Wahlberg repeated, his voice rising slightly. "I'm a father, a husband, and someone who works every day to be better than I was yesterday. I've never hidden from my past, but I'm not going to let you or anyone else define me by the worst moments of my teenage years." Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying pushing Wahlberg toward his breaking point. But those moments say something about character, don't they? About the kind of person you fundamentally are? "The kind of person I fundamentally am?" Wahlberg's voice was getting louder now. "You want to talk about character? Let's talk about the character of someone who invites a guest onto their show just to ambush them with personal attacks." The confrontation was escalating quickly. Wahlberg had come prepared for a friendly interview, but Colbert seemed determined to turn it into a hostile interrogation. The actor was clearly struggling to understand why he was being treated this way. "I'm just asking the questions that I think the audience wants answered," Colbert said with fake innocence. "No, you're not," Wahlberg fired back. "You're trying to humiliate me on national television for your own entertainment. This isn't journalism, it's cruelty." The tension in the studio was now unbearable. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't typical late-night television banter. This was a full-blown confrontation between a host and guest, and it was about to get much worse. Colbert seemed to take Wahlberg's accusation of cruelty as a challenge rather than a wake-up call. Instead of backing down or attempting to steer the conversation in a more professional direction, the host doubled down on his hostile approach. "Cruelty?" Colbert laughed, but it was a harsh sound that echoed uncomfortably through the studio. "I think what's cruel is pretending to be something you're not and expecting everyone to just go along with it." Wahlberg's hands gripped the arms of his chair. You could see him fighting to maintain his composure, trying to be the bigger person in a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of control. "Stephen, I don't know what I did to you personally, but this is completely unprofessional." "Unprofessional?" Colbert's voice dripped with mock surprise. "You want to talk about unprofessional? Let's talk about assaulting innocent people on the street. Let's talk about the hate crimes you committed." "That seems pretty unprofessional to me." The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some people were looking around, wondering if this was some kind of planned bit that had gone too far, but the genuine anger and hurt on Wahlberg's face made it clear that this was all too real. "Those were crimes I committed as a 16-year-old kid," Wahlberg said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "I was addicted to drugs. I was angry, and I was completely lost. But I served my time, I got clean, and I spent the next 3 decades trying to make up for it." "Oh, you served your time?" Colbert's tone was dripping with sarcasm. 45 days in jail for a hate crime. That really sounds like justice to me." Wahlberg's face flushed red. "I was a minor. The legal system handled my case according to the law. And since then, I've tried to reach out to the people I hurt to apologize personally." "Tried to reach out?" Colbert repeated mockingly. "That sounds very convenient. Did you actually succeed in reaching them? Or did you just try so you could tell people you tried?" The personal nature of the attack was clearly getting to Wahlberg. This wasn't just about his past anymore. Colbert was questioning his sincerity, his motives, and his character in the most public way possible. "I did reach some of them," Wahlberg said quietly. "And those conversations were private, between me and them. I'm not going to exploit their forgiveness for your entertainment." "How noble of you," Colbert sneered. "The convicted felon taking the high road." That phrase hit Wahlberg like a slap in the face. His entire body tensed, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually get up and leave right then. But he stayed in his chair, though his voice was shaking with barely controlled anger. "You know what, Stephen? I came here to talk about a movie where I play a father trying to protect his family. Maybe you should think about what kind of example you're setting right now." Colbert's response was swift and cutting. "Oh, I'm setting a bad example? That's rich, coming from someone who literally beat people in the street because of the color of their skin." The studio fell dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. This had crossed a line that everyone in the room knew shouldn't be crossed, but Colbert kept pushing. "You want to play the family man now, but what happens when your kids ask you about your past? What happens when they Google their daddy's name and read about what you really did?" Wahlberg's composure finally cracked. "Don't you dare bring my children into this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My kids know about my past because I've been honest with them about it. They know that people can change and grow. Can they, though?" Colbert pressed on relentlessly. "Because it seems to me like you just learned how to hide it better. You learned how to say the right things and smile for the cameras." "You don't know anything about me," Wahlberg shot back. "You don't know about the work I do in my community. You don't know about the programs I support for at-risk youth. You don't know about the conversations I've had with my own children about making better choices than I did." Colbert shrugged dismissively. "I know what I read in the police reports." The callousness of that response seemed to break something inside Wahlberg. Here was a man who had spent decades trying to atone for the mistakes of his youth, being reduced to nothing but his worst moments by someone who clearly had no interest in redemption or growth. "You know what your problem is, Stephen?" Wahlberg said, his voice steady but filled with disgust. "You think that because you have a television show, You have the right to sit in judgment of everyone else. You think that because you can make jokes and hide behind comedy, you can say whatever cruel thing pops into your head. Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment, but then returned with even more venom. At least I never committed a hate crime. No, Wahlberg replied. You just commit character assassination on national television. At least my victims knew they were being attacked. The exchange was becoming more heated by the second. Both men were now leaning forward in their chairs, their voices raised, their antagonism on full display for millions of viewers. Character assassination? Colbert laughed bitterly. I'm just telling the truth about who you are. The truth? Wahlberg's voice was incredulous. The truth is that I was a screwed-up kid who did terrible things and then spent my entire adult life trying to become a better person. The truth is that redemption is possible if you're willing to do the work. Redemption? Colbert repeated mockingly. Is that what you call it when Hollywood decides to make you a millionaire? Wahlberg shook his head in disbelief. You really think this is all just about money and fame? You think I haven't genuinely changed? I think you're very good at public relations, Colbert said coldly. The insult hung in the air between them. Wahlberg stared at Colbert for a long moment, and you could see him making a decision. He was done trying to reason with someone who had clearly made up his mind before the interview even started. You know what, Stephen? Wahlberg said, his voice calm but filled with finality. I think we're done here. But Colbert wasn't finished. As Wahlberg started to shift in his chair, preparing to stand up, the host delivered what would become the most infamous 36 seconds in late-night television history. Wait, Colbert said with a cruel smile, holding up his hand as Wahlberg began to rise from his chair. Before you go, I have one more question for you, Mark. Wahlberg paused, halfway out of his seat, and looked back at the host with a mixture of exhaustion and disgust. What now, Stephen? Colbert leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who thought he was about to deliver a knockout punch. I'm just wondering, when your kids get older and they start dating, are you going to teach them your methods for handling people who are different from them? The question landed like a bomb in the studio. The audience gasped audibly. Even the camera crew seemed stunned by the sheer cruelty of what Colbert had just said. He had taken Wahlberg's past mistakes and weaponized them against his role as a father in the most vicious way imaginable. For a moment, Wahlberg just stood there, staring at Colbert in complete disbelief. The color drained from his face as the full impact of what the host had just implied sank in. This wasn't just another attack on his past anymore. This was an attack on his children, his parenting, and his ability to be a good father. What did you just say? Wahlberg's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than if he had been shouting. Colbert, either oblivious to how far he had crossed the line or simply not caring, pressed on. I mean, you're their role model, right? Kids learn from their parents. So I'm just curious what lessons you're passing down. The 36 seconds that followed would become legendary in television history. Wahlberg's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, rage, and finally, a cold determination. When he spoke, his voice was steady but filled with such controlled fury that it seemed to freeze the entire studio. You are a disgusting human being, Wahlberg said, each word precisely delivered. I came here to talk about my work, and you turned this into a personal attack. But bringing my children into this, suggesting that I would teach them to hurt people, that crosses a line that you can never uncross. Colbert tried to maintain his smug expression, but for the first time all evening, he looked uncertain. I was just asking a question. No, Wahlberg cut him off sharply. You were trying to destroy me on television for your own sick entertainment. But you know what the difference is between me and you, Stephen? When I was 16 and I did those terrible things, I was a kid. I was messed up. I was on drugs, and I had no guidance. But you're a grown man, sitting behind this desk, with a team of writers and producers, and you chose to be cruel. You chose to attack a guest who came here in good faith. The host's face was starting to show cracks in his confidence. Mark, I think you're overreacting. Overreacting? Wahlberg's voice rose slightly. You just implied that I'm raising my children to be violent racists, and you think I'm overreacting? You attacked my ability to be a father based on mistakes I made 30 years ago when I was a teenager. The studio was dead silent, except for Wahlberg's voice. Every person in the room seemed to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a heated exchange anymore. This was a complete breakdown of the traditional host and guest relationship. My children, Wahlberg continued, his voice shaking with emotion. are being raised to treat everyone with respect and dignity. They're being raised to understand that people make mistakes and that redemption is possible. They're being raised to be better than I was at their age. And for you to suggest otherwise is not just wrong, it's evil. Colbert tried to regain control of the situation. Mark, I think we should take a commercial break. No, Wahlberg said firmly. You wanted to have this conversation on television, so let's have it. You want to talk about character? Let's talk about yours. What kind of person invites someone onto their show just to humiliate them? What kind of person takes someone's worst moments and uses them to hurt them in front of millions of people? The host was clearly struggling now. His usual quick wit and confident demeanor had completely abandoned him. I was just doing my job. Your job? Wahlberg laughed bitterly. Your job is to entertain people, not to destroy them. Your job is to have interesting conversations, not to conduct public executions. But you turned this into a hit piece because you thought it would make for good television. Colbert tried one more time to deflect. I think you're taking this too personally. That was the final straw. Wahlberg's composure completely shattered, and his voice filled with raw emotion. Too personally? You attacked my children. You questioned my ability to be a good father. You suggested that I'm teaching them to hate people. How is that not personal? The actor began moving toward the edge of the stage, clearly preparing to leave. But he wasn't done speaking yet. You know what the saddest part of this whole thing is, Stephen? I actually used to respect you. I thought you were smart and funny and insightful. But tonight, you showed everyone who you really are. You're not a comedian or an interviewer. You're a bully with a television show. Colbert made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Mark, please sit down. Let's start over. Wahlberg stopped and turned back to face the host one final time. Start over? You can't start over from this, Stephen. You can't take back what you said about my children. You can't pretend that this was all just entertainment. You revealed something ugly about yourself tonight, and everyone saw it. The actor's voice became quiet but carried clearly throughout the silent studio. I forgave myself for the mistakes I made when I was 16 because I did the work to become a better person. But you're making your mistakes right now as a grown man on national television, and you don't even seem to understand how wrong this is. With that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the set of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, leaving behind one of the most shocking moments in television history. The camera stayed on Colbert's face for several long seconds, capturing his stunned expression as he realized what had just happened. The host tried to recover, attempted to make a joke to ease the tension, but the damage was done. The studio audience sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure whether to applaud or simply leave. The crew members behind the cameras looked at each other with expressions of disbelief and concern. In 36 seconds, Stephen Colbert had destroyed his own reputation with a single cruel comment about Wahlberg's children. He had taken what should have been a routine celebrity interview and turned it into a character assassination that backfired spectacularly. The man who walked off that stage wasn't the troubled teenager from Boston that Colbert had tried to portray. He was a father, a professional, and ultimately, a human being who had been pushed too far by someone who forgot that behind every celebrity is a real person with real feelings and real family members who don't deserve to be dragged into public humiliation for the sake of entertainment.